This is for English 201, English 201, the 11th of the 6th. We're now beginning A Gathering of Old Men by Mr. J.A. Roy Bodden. When we're looking at this collection, aren't we looking at an important aspect of Caribbean literature, an aspect that's been, in a sense, neglected so far, namely the development of Caymanian literature and letters, writings. And in a sense, then, Roy Bodden has attempted to fill a huge gap that has existed previously in terms of creating a large oeuvre, a collection of writings by Caymanians about Caymanian life, history, and culture. It's actually quite useful if you read this one along with extracts from the Cayman Islands in Transition, his previous set of essays. But of course, before this, along with A Gathering of Old Men, was the collection called Stories My Grandfather Never Told Me, which some of you, I think, were exposed to previously. Yes? Okay. Now, why do I say read a collection of supposedly fiction stories with essays, non-fiction essays? Why? Because the same mission is addressed in both, namely an attempt to get down in black and white. Yes? A voice that understands the more dramatic developments, if you want to put it that way, in Caymanian life, culture, and history and economics. Because remember that the economics of a society actually do what? They govern so much of the other things that happen. And if you look at Cayman Islands in Transition, the preface to it, you will find that many of the same ideas that are developed in that book actually pop up and resurface in A Gathering of Old Men. And why do I say the preface? Because, interestingly, of course, some of us have to admit that we're guilty of the following. We jump over the preface or the introduction to many works that we read. But this isn't logical. Why? Because the preface or the introduction is like a letter, a guideline, yes, from the writer to us as readers. Yes? And a good preface will encapsulate many of the main issues that are developed in the book. Yes? And the same is true of the preface to Cayman Islands in Transition. And one of the issues dealt with in Cayman Islands in Transition and in the preface, yes, briefly, of course, more briefly in the preface, is, of course, the issue of change in the Cayman Islands. That we're looking at a period of intense, aggressive, socio-economic change in Cayman. So aggressive, so intense, in fact, that you could say that, in a sense, the changes in the economic conditions of Cayman in, say, the past 50 years have hit Cayman really hard. That the money came in large amounts, but it came at a high price in terms of Cayman society itself and the values of the culture and the society. And as such then, many people talk about, when they first came on a holiday to Cayman 25 years ago, what it was like then compared to how it is now. It's more developed, in quotation marks. it's more modern, yes, in quotation marks. But what Bodden asks in the Cayman Islands in transition, as he does in many of his lectures, is what was the nature of the development, yes, and at what price modernity and globalization. Now, in other words, if Cayman is one of the top 5 money industry places, if you want to call it that, in the world, yes, financial service countries in the world, obviously then we're not producing things to sell. If we look at our friends over in China, they produce everything, yes? And they sell it to everybody. Isn't that the truth? Yes or no? The same with our friends in Japan. Yes? They produce cars, don't they? And they sell them wherever they can. Our friends in Germany, they're famous for their cars. People will pay whatever they want for them, the Germans demand for them, unquestioningly. In other words, these people actually produce something concrete. Yes? What do we do in Cayman? We are, in a sense, what? Facilitators. Yes? And this, of course, means that if we're facilitating services, like the finance industry, does it then mean that we don't send the products, the cars, the cars again, or the dollies, the clothes, the gadgets, all kinds of things that come out of China, yeah, the shoes, everything that you look at says made in China, yes? The costume jewelry, everything. It's not that we are producing things that we send out to the world. Rather, the world comes to us for these services, either online or, of course, in person. Is that true? Tourism and banking, international finance, yes or no? Now, if the world is coming to us, are we going to find ourselves slap bang up against globalization? Yes or no? Yeah, of course. And is it also true that though tourism, or because tourism and banking are Cayman's big money makers, but we are also going to be faced with what? A barrage of constant change, because tourism and banking are 2 areas of the international economy that are constantly subject to change. Does this make sense? Yes. So in Mr. Bodden's recent collection of poems, one of the ones he read, which I just loved when I first read it because it was so ironic, it was the story of, a man coming off, a tourist coming off of a cruise ship in downtown Grand Cayman, and he's phoning home to his dad or his mom, I don't know, maybe they're somewhere in West Virginia or such place, and he's talking to them, and he says, well, it's all very interesting, but where are the Caymanians? Yes? And that was the point that Bodden was making and makes constantly. In other words, are we looking at a disappearing Caymanian individual of a certain type, but are we also looking at a disappearing version of Cayman culture? And of course, family life. Okay, so that question, of course, is a haunting one, which Bodden keeps readdressing, along with the issue of the sale of large amounts, large tracts of land, valuable land by Caymanians, to get large amounts of quick money, but quick money has a tendency to go as fast as it came, if you know what I mean. Yes or no? Okay. The money comes, the money goes, as the song by Billy Joel says, yes? You know who was Billy Joel? Italian-American singer. Still is alive, still going strong. Yes? He has the song says, I think it's about California lifestyle. The money comes, the money goes. Yes. So in actual fact, then, our relationship with land and money, is that an important relationship wherever we live? Yes or no? Human beings. But because of what was happening, the dramatic changes that were happening in Cayman over, say, the last 50 years, is the relationship, and I'll take the liberty of saying our, because I guess in many ways I have lived here long enough that I kind of identify with a lot of what happens in Cayman, yes? Is our relationship then with the land and with money a complex one? Precisely because we were being bombarded, or Caymanians of the older generation, the over 40 people, were being bombarded by modernity, technology, globalization in all its aspects within such a short space of time. Yes or no? Yes, of course. And does that then mean that the texture of the culture itself was going to be changing? And along with those changes came serious changes in value systems. And are the changes in the value systems some of Bodden's main concerns? Yes. Now, how does he address those? He addresses those a lot in the collection of poems, which we got readings from about a week and a half, really just a week ago, yes? Last Wednesday. But what about A Gathering of Old Men? Does that book, in a sense, and go back in time to revisit the older generation of Caymanians who, in actual fact, were anticipating the changes and seeing the beginnings of these changes? Yes or no? And of course, I asked you to read the introduction, didn't I? And I asked you to read also the chapter called The Meeting at the Guardhouse in Boddentown. And are we looking at one important structure that we've met before, namely voice? Yes? Page 130, A Gathering of Old Men at the Guardhouse in Boddentown, circa 1953. Can we all see a copy? If you can't, can you share with somebody? Yes? And in a sense, is this a means by which, structurally speaking, Bodden actually traces the anticipation of change and the coming of change and its impacts? Yes? Page 130. The old men had been gathering at this place for a long time, but my earliest recollection came when I was a mere youth of about 7 or 8 years of age. Their numbers during these evening conclaves varied, but at no time were they less than 4. Now, does Bodden himself come from Boddentown? Of course. Was he a representative of Boddentown in the Legislative Assembly for years? Yes. And does he then create a first-person narrator who, says I, who obviously is very intimate with us and with the events that he's discussing, but does he also create this narrator as a symbol of what was happening in the society as well? In other words, it's not just a creative structure the I narrator, the first person narrator, is this first person narrator also in the role of the witness? Yes or no? Yes. And is that role of the witness a very, very important one? Okay. And can we look to other international writers, yes, when we find this particular version of the first person narrator who identifies himself or herself in the role of a witness? Yes? And where do we find this, of course? In literatures that come from new societies, societies that were also, like Cayman, bombarded by dramatic changes, yes? And of course, globalization. And are we looking at two classic writers of American literature? Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, yes? And do see the film. We talked about the film already and its availability from these questionable video shops. Okay, but we have the older versions of it online, you know. Yes? And you can go online and look. Okay? Robert Redford, the beloved, he's now a producer, yes? Was in one of the earlier versions as Mr. Gatsby. Yes, in all his youthful glory. Yes? And what was interesting about the introduction of that book, the I narrator, establishes an intimate relationship with the reader immediately and says, well, but when I was young, my father told me never judge other people too quickly or too harshly because they may not have had the advantages you have had. And throughout the book, we are aware of the fact that Nick, the narrator, is a witness to Mr. Gatsby, who is already dead. In other words, the book has a circular structure. When we're beginning to hear about Mr. Gatsby, he's already dead. So Nick is the storyteller, the I narrator, is in the role of what? A witness to his life. Joan Didion, one of the most successful, still living, still writing American writers. You will have come upon her in English 102, an essay called The Santa Ana. We've done English 102 yet? Yeah. In the textbook. Maybe not in the latest version, the Bedford Reader, you're still doing that? I'm a bit out of touch with English 102, thank God. I really hated it as a course, I must admit. Anyway, Didion, the Santa Ana. The Santa Ana winds, those super hot winds that blow through California every summer, setting houses and trees and everything on fire. Did they come through early this year, in May, I think? Serious fires. Was it March? Yes. Anyway, Didion has this essay called, this short book, one of our big sellers. Well, all our books are big sellers, quite frankly. Hollywood buys them regularly to make them into films. Yes? Didion's book, one of her famous ones, was A Book of Common Prayer. Yes? And how does she start? I will be her witness. In other words, the concept of the I narrator, the first person narrator, as standing witness on the life and the truth of someone or something that is not in a position to express his or her own story for themselves. You understand? I will be her witness. Does this take us right back to Shakespeare? And of course, guess who? The beloved character, Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark. Yes? Who is Hamlet's best friend and alter ego? The working class man who is the common ordinary soldier, Horatio. But when Hamlet is dying, does he tell his good friend Horatio, absent thee from felicity for a while? Felicity is the happiness of no longer living. Yes? Absent thee from felicity a while. To do what? Tell the truth of his story. Yes? And are we looking at this concept then of the first-person narrator, storyteller, as not just a kind of creative invention, a structural, invention, but as a witness to something bigger and more important than himself or herself? Is this precisely how the first-person narrator functions in the Bodden collection? And are we looking at page 130 when Bodden uses that first-person narrator? In other words, he was a little boy perhaps listening and watching these old men talking and meeting every weekend, yes? And was he then witnessing simply overhearing adults' conversations, like the the boy narrator in Miguel Street? Or is there more to it than that? Are we looking at, or are we hearing the voice of not just a structural device called the first-person narrative voice, but of a witness? And in Bodden's book's case, it's a witness to the history of Cayman and the beginning of changes that were so intense that in actual fact, they were overwhelming, or almost overwhelming. Yes or no? And do we then see different characters all creating individual voices? But do they all come together as a kind of chorus, all telling the same story, all expressing the same anxieties and fears about the future of Cayman? Page 131, the dialogue begins, yes? Page 130 to the top of 131, you will notice that it is where, what are we looking at? The first-person narrative voice, the voice of the witness, yes? Giving us the background information. There were men from to windward, down along the road and from leeward. They gathered from dusk and sometimes lingered till midnight, chewing the rag and spinning yarn as they termed their conversations. They were the griots, the historians and storytellers of the diaspora who came from all over the village. Philosophers were on page 130, steeped in the hardy lessons of frontier existence. Early times, no TVs, no BMWs, no air conditioning. Seers peering into the future of a changing society. Is that a very important image that he gives us? There were seers. Seers are prophetic people who are, intuitive, who are able to look ahead into the future. Yes? Peering into the future of a changing society. Yes? Men who at some stage in their lives traveled great distances and lived in strange places like San Pedro Sula in Honduras, Pearl Lagoon and Bluefields in Nicaragua, Limon in Costa Rica and Isla de Pinos, the Isle of Pines they call it today, originally what? Isla de Juventud, and Havana, Cuba. Now, the Isle of Pines is actually a part of Cuba, yes, where many Caymanians still live and can tell you of their grandparents still living there. And do not forget those who worked in the Panama Canal, to name a few. In other words, is he showing us Caymanians as world travelers? Do we have a sense today that Cayman is the place that receives a lot of immigrants? But is he showing us the Caymanian as the traveler, the immigrant? Yes. And is this in line with Cayman's history that he also shows us as Caymanians, as some of the great sailors and boat builders of not only the Caribbean, but the world? Do we also, some of us have older generation people in the family who went to work on the Panama Canal? Was the Panama Canal built almost entirely by immigrant labor? Yes or no? And did those people then often stay in the United States of America or Panama? Yes or no? Of course. Okay. So are we getting a different insight into Caymanian workers' histories? Yes or no? That Caymanians, and it shouldn't surprise us, Cayman being surrounded by the ocean, that they were people who what? Knew they had to conquer the ocean. Isn't that the truth? If you're surrounded by all this water, sooner or later you're going to have to come to terms with it and conquer it. Yes. And of course, enjoy traveling on it. And in addition to these regional places, some were reputed to have traveled to exotic destinations like Shanghai, China, and Lagos, Nigeria. They formed a kind of Sanhedrin, passing judgments on the wayward, chastising the delinquents, and reminding all and sundry of the values and morality of Caymanian village life. In other words, they were the elders of the society, no matter how old they were. They were the people who were the voices of what? Values. And the inheritors of values, but also the ones who wish to pass on the most important values. They were respected, hardworking, and authoritative, steeped in the hardiness of frontier existence and bearing all the hallmarks of the Caymanian diaspora, the diaspora of all the islands. Men who were accustomed to being obeyed. They brooked no opposition from fops and upstarts and tolerated no interlopers. No dogs among doctors, they chorused, as an obvious warning when they suspected a stranger loitering on the periphery of their gathering. In other words, that this was a very intimate group of people who did not want any outsiders listening to their conversations. Which takes us then to another theme in the work, and it's also, of course, a common theme in Caymanian reality and society and culture, namely how to deal with outsiders and also how to deal with the outside world. But again, does geography also become part of our destiny? If we are surrounded by lots of water, does this mean that not only are we going to get careers that have to do with the ocean, yes, but does it also mean that unless we are going to stay locked in by the ocean, we are going to have to either go out on the ocean as sailors, immigrants ourselves, travelers, or are we going to have to deal with what the ocean brings to us? Yes or no? Yes. And is this part of the challenge then of Cayman and the outside world? If we stay by ourselves forever in an island surrounded by water, what will happen? What happened? What did Cayman find happening to her? Sorry?
we don't.
We would find ourselves kind of sinking, wouldn't we? And do we also have problems that Cayman used to have of intermarriage with your family? Yes or no? Yeah, that you actually needed people to come from the ocean, on the ocean, from outside, to what? Bring new blood into the family. But did we also need people to come from outside to break the boredom? Is the boredom factor real? If you are either landlocked in a small area surrounded by land, yes, with no ways to get out, or you are locked in by the ocean, yes or no? Now, does this then mean, however, that one of our big challenges in such a situation would be finding ways to deal with the external influences? In other words, the ocean could bring means of meeting new people, expanding our families and our choices of companions. But could it also mean bringing money? The money that came from elsewhere in the form of these people called tourists and investors, yes. But the money didn't walk on its own feet, you know. It came with the people, yes. Then were there the people who were the workers, migrant workers, who came with various skills, or they came to do things we didn't want to do ourselves. Oh dear. Yes. But again, the skills didn't walk on their own feet. They came in the person of people. So are we always looking at the need to what? Come to terms with outside influences and the outsiders who might bring benefits but who also might bring problems. Yes or no? And challenges, new challenges that we had to face. Yes or no? So is that what when he means when he says no dogs among doctors? They chorused. When they suspected a stranger who might have been hanging around on the edges of their group. Yes. Is that also a metaphor for the resistance of the older Caymanian society against newcomers, outsiders? Yes or no? And of course, is this a problem that Bodden addresses again remember I said to you in the beginning today that we want to go and look at the preface to Cayman Islands in Transition, yes? Where he talks about the need, and this is a very urgent need, isn't it? I'm sure you'll agree, the need for both the Caymanians, the born and bred Caymanians, and the outsiders to learn to live with each other and learn to communicate with each other and interact with each other in a positive way. How does he put it? He says, instead of lighting a candle, they all quite predictably curse the darkness. It's a powerful analogy, isn't it? Instead of lighting a candle, they all quite predictably curse the darkness. He says that the older born and bred Caymanians, what he calls the settled Caymanians, need to stop insulting and looking down their noses, so to speak, at the newcomers. Yes, the outsiders. And the outsiders, the privileged among the outsiders, needed to what? Stop stereotyping the Caymanians. In other words, instead of cursing the darkness, we all need to light a candle. It's a powerful metaphor, or analogy, that of course will stay with you as it did with me if you read the preface to the Cayman Islands in Transition. But is that need to come to terms with each other, the two groups in the society, yes? The born and bred Caymanians and the newcomers or the outsiders, do they all need to face the fact that they all have a stake in Cayman and in her success and continuation? Yes or no? Yes. And in this gathering of old men, the dialogue, do we see that theme coming up over and over as a major theme, namely the need for everybody in Cayman to come to terms with the changes and also with each other? Okay, page 131, the dialogue begins there. And can we visibly see different voices of different old men? Do we need to stop a little bit? No? Are there different voices of different old men talking? One says, the middle of page 131, a time is coming in this place when you'll wake up and find a man dead beside the road and you won't know who killed him. I remember them prophesying as they warned against what would happen when the eight bloods mixed with Caymanians. That is, the outsiders mixed with the Caymanians. So do we get the voice of our witness, our first-person narrator, interfacing with the voices of the old men? Yes or no? Is that how the structure is woven? He's reporting this conversation. But remember, he listened as what? A young man. You know, listening in on the conversation of older men. Okay. Say what? You heard what I said. Don't you see what's happening? Every crab from the bush is winding up here. Too many foreigners, too much flotsam. Flotsam and jetsam, isn't that it? The stuff that floats on the ocean. Yes? Mm-hmm. Every jackman and his master washing up on Cayman shore. Flotsam, I say, washing up on the shore like driftwood. First, John Bolton, the limey, the Englishman who came to a tropical island in a pair of woolen trousers with the intention of taking over. That's what the English people are said to have done. Next come the panheads and the Boer Spaniards, and always the mosquitoes. I couldn't give a fiddler's fart who come. They ain't running me from here. So do we have different voices with different attitudes?
I don't know when they're saying anything. There's no quotation.
Sorry?
I don't know when they're talking.
Yes, I don't know either. But I think that either you can look at it as one person's inner consciousness who is simply saying everything, and the I narrator occasionally interrupts and makes a comment. Or you can see them as different voices, but all of them concerned with the same issues. Okay? Are we looking at the issue of the Caymanian and the foreigner here? Yes? I think there are different voices there, because if you look at the top of page 132, that's what you believe. Can't you see that we will be outnumbered in 10 years' time? Light up the smoke pan. What's the smoke pan? Isn't that the pan with the green leaves in it? Mm-hmm. And charcoal at the bottom that people would light to get rid of the mosquitoes. Mm-hmm. In sometimes after hurricanes in Jamaica, my mother would do it. Yeah? Sorry, you do it a lot.
They used to do it almost every evening.
Yeah, yeah. It actually gets rid of the mosquitoes, you know, they don't like the smell. And I think it's probably a lot better on the lungs than the stuff we buy. Those, what they call it, the candles. Mm-hmm. That's progress, old boy. You can't stop that. We'll be using smoke pans and making up smoke forever, 'cause mosquitoes are like us. They're always here. And here's the prologue some evenings later. And do we get then different themes kind of intermingling in this conversation? Yes or no? Okay. And is one of the major themes about the sale of land to foreigners, the bottom of page 132. Okay. Now, as Bodden said last week, Caymanians used to be land-rich people. But by selling the land, large amounts of land, often seaside land, to the foreigners, the Caymanians find themselves losing their land. Yes or no?
Yeah.
And selling the land, for what looked like a lot of money, $1 million, yes? But then $1 million got spent on what? The millionaire lifestyle. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Besides, will land last where money will not? Yes or no? Mm-hmm. You've heard the expression safe as houses. The British use that expression. It's safe as houses. In other words, the land, the house and the land you build the house on will stay. Unless, of course, everyone comes and blows it all away. Yes. We can't forget that.
Yeah.
But the truth is that, as we said earlier on, quick money comes quickly and goes quickly. Yes or no? Mm-hmm. Is there also a classic concept of our relationship as human beings with land? Yes or no? Do we come from the land? Will we go back into it?
Yeah.
Yes. That's at least one thing we're sure of. Yes? If we're buried at sea, we'll still end up in the land. Yes? In the bottom of the ocean. If we're buried on the ground, we'll still end up in the land. If we are cremated, will the ashes end up in the land? In other words, we're going to end up in the land sooner or later. We belong to the land. It's actually, we assume the land belongs to us, but in an ironic way, can we see it that we belong to the land too? Okay, so do we have a fundamental relationship between us as human beings and the land? Of course. When overpopulation happens and people multiply themselves too fast, and worse yet, technology and medicine make us live too long. Yes? And then, of course, what else? Technology and medicine also give us the option to do what? Fewer children are killed in childbirth, so you have more children. What happens with overpopulation? Does the land suffer? Yes or no? How many of you have done the environmental science 1 and 2, those interesting courses? Jada, not you? No? You're with us, Jada? Yeah? What are you looking up in the magic phone?
My cousin in Germany, she messaged me.
Oh, but we don't do that in class, do we? Our conversation.
Tell her before she goes to sleep.
Yes, but should we say excuse me or something? Huh?
I tell her by now.
Yes. Or better yet, just go outside or say excuse me, like what happens if, yeah. What was I talking about, Jada? We were talking about our relationship with the land, yes? Mm-hmm. And is there this thing called Earth's carrying capacity? You didn't do environmental science, any of you?
Yeah,
You did, Jada?
Yep.
Does this ring a bell? What is it? The capacity of Earth to carry so many people and no more. Yes? Now, when overpopulation happens, what happens? Disasters as well. Do a lot of environmental scientists actually tell us that huge natural disasters that kill thousands of people at one time happen most often in places where overpopulation exists? Because that is Mother Nature's way of unloading some of the extra
Okay.
load of people, because Earth has what they call a carrying capacity. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Or is it a rationalizations for hurricanes and such? Does anything come back to mind, Jada, about that from
Like earthquakes and stuff.
earthquakes? In other words, do you notice that many of these huge environmental disasters that kill thousands of people at one time happen in places where there is a high level of overpopulation?
Like Philippines and Japan and
Yes or no?
yeah.
Have you noticed that? So could the environmental scientists have a point? Could they have a point? It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like we're just trying to rationalize this thing, you know.
Trying to get some idea of
Maybe to feel better about these hurricanes and so on. But could they have a point?
yeah.
Mhm. All right. So then, we're looking at the anxiety about overpopulation and the anxiety about losing the land. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay. Page 133. Near the bottom, does he mention this man Gerard, who was once governor, that he mentioned last Wednesday as well? The one who said, we are not going to have these segregated dances anymore. Yes? He probably gave lots of people high blood pressure. Isn't that the truth? We're not having one dance for the black people and one dance for the white people. We're having one dance for everybody. Okay. What is it that we see on page 133? You know, I see a pattern to these things. Thank you, Jada. Just like Gerard said, people want modern things, fridges and cars. So what do? Sell their land, sell their birthright for a measure of pottage. That's what they do. And the whole debate about selling the land is one of the major themes in the book. Yes or no? And what's wrong with that once you get what you want for it? Yes. And